Thank you again, Bennett. It's always nice to have someone come back and ask if they can fill in. So, good morning. All right. So when Pastor Roger asked me to preach on New Year's, he said I could speak on kind of whatever I wanted. I've got, the whole option of New Year's, the idea of being made new. Like there's a lot of different ways we could go with this. But as I was thinking, the big thing, and the big thing we all love to do, especially as Americans, is make New Year's. With New Year's, we're going to make resolutions. We're going to resolve to make big changes and, changes in our lives through our own willpower. Like, this is a good time that we've arbitrarily decided this is when we're going to do it. But the problem with a lot of these resolutions, because I don't know the exact statistics, but I've seen anywhere from 75 to 85 to 90% of resolutions fail within the first 6 weeks of the new year. And it's because a lot of these resolutions are by our own strength. Our human willpower, our ideas, and our wanting to push through like the little engine that could, it's simply not enough. So we have to ask ourselves then, is it hopeless? Are we stuck constantly living as we always do? Even if we go into this year of that being made new, it's a new opportunity, do we need to just throw our hands up in the air and say it's not worth it? Well, as I'm thinking through this question, I remember a passage in Isaiah. It is Isaiah 40 kept coming up. Now that's a passage that oftentimes the thing we remember and the thing we know is that we will soar on wings like eagles. And that is a great image that Isaiah is presenting, but it's such a small part of the overall passage. So you see, when you're asking yourself, what's Isaiah 40 talking about? Well, it starts off very quickly. Isaiah says, "Comfort, comfort my people, says your God." See, Israel at this time is incredibly troubled and oppressed. It was written by Isaiah during the Assyrian oppression, which is one of the many cycles of Israel. We talked through last summer the cycle of Judges where they would, go to God and then turn away from God and do what was right in their own eyes. So then God would give Israel up to an enemy, an oppressor, a power, and then he would raise up salvation for them. Well, the thing is, that cycle didn't stop after the Judges. It just got bigger with kings and evil kings. And so Israel was constantly in this cycle where it would turn away from God, and then God would deliver them into the hands of the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Persians and all of these empires that were around it. And this just kept happening. So Isaiah's writing this at this time, towards the end, after Israel has cried out for help. Israel knows that it needs the strength of God. So the key to Isaiah 40 is not actually about that comfort. It's an important piece of it, but that's not the center of it. Because Isaiah 40 is about God's power. Now, I would encourage each and every one of you to read the entire poem. It's beautiful, full of imagery. But one of the things that he writes, if you want to pull up the next slide here, verse 22 and 23 gives a glimpse of what he's been saying over and over again. Isaiah writes, "It is he, that is God, who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them like a tent to dwell in. He who brings princes to nothing and makes the rulers of the earth as emptiness." It's this beautiful poem talking about God's supremacy and God's power and how much greater God is than the entire earth. How much greater he is than even our problems. Now again, I would say after church, if you've got nothing to do, if you don't, the Vikings aren't playing until later, read through that whole passage. It's beautiful. But the climax, where it's all building, comes in the final moment, in the last movement of this chapter. So in verse 27, we see a crisis. Isaiah asks, "Why do you say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and my right is disregarded by my God?" Now, this is an incredibly strong accusation, especially after the 26 verses before that, where he's talking about how great God is. Israel believes that God has abandoned them, that he will not help them. They're crying out, begging for him to come back. They believe that they have a right to being God's chosen people, yet because they were suffering, they believe that right was disregarded. Now, I think in our translation, in our English, we often lose kind of the emphasis of this because we hold Scripture to, a pious place where Isaiah's sitting there and calmly asking them this question. But I don't think that that's what's going on here. I don't think that this is a calm question at all. He's asking them why. Why would you say that? In English, there is a punctuation mark that is one of my favorites. You don't see it much. If you want to go pull it up here. It's called the interrobang. And what the interrobang is a combination of a question mark and an exclamation point. I think that if Isaiah were writing in English, that's what would be at the end of this passage. So I've added it up to this verse on the next slide here. That's what he's saying. He's crying out to Israel, "Why are you saying this? Why are you saying that God has abandoned you?" It's not a calm question. He's not settled in nicely. He's begging Israel to ask that within themselves. But he doesn't end there. He immediately turns to the solution to this crisis. In the second part of verse 28, Isaiah continues with more questions. But these questions aren't answered. What he's saying is, have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the Creator over the ends of the earth. This is a rhetorical question. He answers it himself. But it's exclaimed. He's crying this out to Israel, asking them if they know who God is. Because if they know who God is, this is paralleling the question before. If they know who God is, they're not going to ask that question at the beginning. They're not going to say that God has abandoned them. Because Israel, of all people, should know this. Israel's history is full of God's provision in spite of their shortcomings. It's full of all these times that God had delivered them out of Egypt. God had delivered them from oppressors. God had given them so much. And Isaiah has spent the entirety of chapter 40 up until this point telling about who God is. He is everlasting. He is the Creator. Again, he's the one that sits over the whole of the earth. And he's repeating it here because this is the answer to Israel's crisis. There's a contrast there between 27 and 28, where Israel is troubled and does not trust God, and yet all of that trouble is solved in God's identity and supremacy at being over all the earth. But he doesn't end there. It goes on. In the second part of verse 28, he continues again with what God does, because what God does is a part of who he is, and how great that is for us. So the result is then that in verse 28, he continues with, he does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. In fact, he gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might, he increases strength. Isaiah here is using a lot of parallels, a lot of contrasting statements. Because it says, he does not faint. In fact, he gives power to the faint. He does not grow weary, but yet he gives might to those who have no might. In those who have no might, he increases strength. It should be impossible. They have none, and yet he increases it. It's not saying, it's a very intentional word choice here. He's not saying, To those who have no might, he gives strength. He's saying to those who have no might, he increases strength. Now, I don't know exactly what he's talking about here, but I know that that's paralleling the fact that we can't understand all of God. And yet, that is just how incredible God is. Verse 30, he says, even the youths shall faint and grow weary, and young men shall fall exhausted. This is inevitable. It's just the fact of life that you're going to be tired, you're going to grow weary. The youths, the young men, these people who in society, the specific words that he's chosen here are those young men who would be servants to the king, who were chosen specifically for their strength. Even they grow weary. Even the youth, the young men will fall exhausted because human willpower will never be enough. But, verse 31, but they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. See, waiting on the Lord means to trust in him. Some translations will give you to hope on the Lord, to trust in the Lord. They who hope, trust, wait in the Lord, their strength will be renewed. Because Isaiah has spent the entire poem telling the greatness and the accomplishments of God. When you start to look at that, it becomes very easy in comparison, very easy to hope in who he is. Because you see how great God is, you see how incredible God is, how he has power over all the earth. He has promised Israel that they would be his chosen people. It's easy then. They can hope in him. They can trust in him. They know that he has what's best for them in mind as long as they trust and they hope. And he will renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. This is again a contrast to the verse before. Every youth, every young man, they will faint and grow weary, but if you trust in the Lord, you shall run and never grow weary, and you shall never grow faint, because this is what happens when you trust in God. Eagles, it's a beautiful full image for that. And, I have a suspicion that one of the many reasons that Roger loves birds so much is because they fly in places that we can never hope to go. They soar. Now, I would imagine for a lot of Israel, a lot of the people who are reading this, they probably have never even seen an eagle land except to eat. They soar endlessly, fly above the sky, as high as the clouds, in a place that we could never hope to achieve. And yet, that soaring, that power, that strength is there when you trust in God. This goes against all of our understanding of the world, about ourselves, about our New Year's resolutions, everything like that. We know that we will tire. We know that our strength is not enough, but yet God is so much greater than anything, any weakness, any trouble, any oppression that we could possibly have. He is so much greater than the Assyrian Empire that the only reason that they were able to oppress Israel was because God said they could. See, Israel should have known who God is. I've got a graphic here if you want to go to the next slide. This is the Jewish calendar. Now, it doesn't have everything, but as you kind of go around, it's a little bit small, sorry about that, but all of the things around the calendar are different feasts. You've got Purim, Passover, Pentecost, Hanukkah. All of these great feasts for Israel is a celebration of something that God has done. It's a celebration of God's salvation, delivering them out of Egypt. It's a celebration of God's deliverance, his grace. They celebrate all of these different things constantly throughout the year, and it's given so that they can know, they can remember who God is and what he did for them. Constantly in the Old Testament, God says, I am the Lord your God who delivered you out of Egypt. who delivered you out of the hands of the oppressors. His identity as he presents himself to them is in what he had done, in his strength, in his power, so that they can remember that he is more powerful than anything in this world. And yet, they constantly needed to be reminded of it. That's why there's this whole cycle, because they would get reminded, God would do something great. The generation that lived in that great thing that God did thought, man, that's incredible. I'm going to go back to worshiping God. They would turn to him. They would tell their children, and then their children's children and children's children. And as they went further and further down the line, they would turn away and fall away, and then it would have to happen all over again. It keeps happening through the whole Old Testament. It's not just confined to Judges. And yet, when they remembered who he was, when they would trust in him, God did incredible things in Israel. In some ways, I think that we're a lot like Israel. We have been given the greatest symbol of God's power that we could possibly imagine. And I think to some of us, I think to myself often, it has become mundane. It's become something we're used to. See, we haul in every single Sunday. We bring the cross in. We set it up at the front. And it's not just because it looks good, it's aesthetically pleasing that it fills out the center of the stage here. We bring it in, we put it at the center because it is the symbol of God's power. It's the symbol of who we are. It is the most recognized symbol in the world. It, more than anything else, if you present it, if you show it to people all over the world, more people would know what it is. But second to that is the golden arches at McDonald's. And sometimes I think we put the two of them real too close together. It's just something else we see. It's something else that's become a part of our daily lives. Because the cross isn't just a symbol for Christianity. The cross is the very thing by which Christ, it is God who would become man, the Christ that we have spent we have a whole holiday for it a week ago. He is God who would become man. He came down and he defeated death itself. The cross is the symbol of the strongest power in this earth, that is death, being defeated by Christ. I had a Mormon friend, a really good friend of mine, played football with him when we were in high school. He asked me, why do you as a not Mormon Christian care about the cross so much? That was how he had phrased it. It's everywhere. We have it on our necklaces. We put it on the church. It's on the top of our steeples when we will eventually have a building. But you see, if you ever were to go to a Latter-day Saints or a Mormon temple, the cross isn't on anything. It doesn't really matter, because what he told me is, well, it was just kind of where he died, because the only reason that Christ died was because he was a human, and to be a human, you have to die. And that is such an astounding misunderstanding of what the cross is. It lacks everything that was done there. They've made up some other thing about how, Christ saved you, but it was through his prayers in the garden. I don't pretend to understand all of what the LDS Church believes, but I know that I can always tell when there's one there because there isn't a cross. And it's because they have decided that the cross is not center. It's not the most important thing. It's not the symbol of power that it truly is. But Paul disagrees. Because in 1 Corinthians 1, he writes, "For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God." So if we focus on God, consistently seeing him for his greatness and his power, there's refreshment and renewal and strength in him. If we focus on Christ and see the power displayed in the cross, seeing how he defeated even death itself, there is so much more hope and peace than we could find in anything. Do you not know, O church? Have you not heard? Christ is the everlasting God, the Creator over the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. He has defeated even death itself. I'm going to pray, and then I'm going to ask Bennett and Brenna to come back up one last time. They've got a special song that Bennett asked to do today that I did not plan with him, but it is incredible just kind of how everything fits together. Let's pray. Dear Lord, I pray that we can see you for who you are. We can see your strength and your power and the victory that you have over death. I pray that your symbol, your cross, does not become a mundane part of our lives, but that it is something that we consistently look to as the greatest symbol of your strength and your power that we have been given. I thank you again for your incredible grace and mercy in all things. Amen.